I loved your post, and I'm hoping we start with how to reimagine your work in the age of AI.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
No, so the book has done really well. I'm really happy to see it's word of mouth has been kind of pushing it forward, and it's opened the right conversations. And so I was primarily looking to see. I've been trying to kind of think about how do you commoditize yourself, because eventually, if you assume that AI is going to commoditize things, uh, not just automate. I think automate is a very simplistic way of looking at it, but commoditize, make something very easily and abundantly accessible. So a lot of
right.
what we're doing is unique to us. So which parts of it can be commoditized? And so I've tried to constantly push that boundary in terms of thinking on that. And so that is where I initially started, and we'll get to the whole graph thing, and the mind map and all of that. Started building that around my work, but when it came to launching a um, companion to the book, initially I had thought I would launch it as a book as well, but the book development cycles are so long and it's so static that I just felt this was much better, and it's actually resonated well. And so it's a good complement. I think books have a very important place still to get a big idea across, but it's a very narrow, uh, it's a very broadly used medium for actually while it's actually good for a very narrow purpose. It's used for everything today, because just because a
Right.
book becomes a calling card, people just write books. Very often, it's not the right medium for the message you're communicating. So that's been sort of um, you know, my read on this. And I think the other thing was that once I started building this, and we can get into that when we get into that, I started. It revitalized my work a lot because
Oh, cool.
yeah, I'm
Well,
happy to share how and
so if you don't mind, it feels like we're already in the podcast conversation. So I'm thinking let's we're
yeah,
good
I
to
don't know
we're
if the
good to
two things
go.
are very unrelated, but that's sort of the background. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what's happening at your end, and then we can get into the podcast conversation as well.
That sounds great. That sounds great. I've been finally finding my voice and my pace a little bit, turning out materials. I have an insane number of things I want to talk about. Uh, so, for example, this one downstairs. There's a big table covered in bubble charts or lily pad
Ah,
diagrams like this one.
okay.
This one is about the question, are smartphones and social media to blame for us getting stupid and anxious? Because I'm trying to respond to the anxious generation Jonathan Haidt argument that
Yeah.
we should take away all these devices from kids. And I'm like, that is the wrong reaction. Um, so that's one of many, many scenes I call
Yeah.
them. I'll draw just one sheet worth of scene. All of this stuff is mirrored in my brain, but the brain is sort of too complicated to show
Right.
all too often.
Yeah.
I think these scenes will be a little bit simpler to share and to talk around. That's one of, as I said, that's one of many. There's three or four other sheets that are about sense making that I'm
Okay.
excited about. And your topic is really exciting to me because I started a project called NeoBooks back when the pandemic kind of took us into lockdown.
Right.
In June of 2020, I started a community called Open Global Mind. We have a standing call every Thursday morning at 8 Pacific, which is still operating.
Hmm.
We're a small, kind of a small community of practice that cares about the pandemic, the poly crisis, how to make the world better, how all these tools and technologies work, et cetera. One of the sub conversations in that was called neobooks because there's a thought in my brain that says books and PDFs are where information goes to die. And then I sat
Yeah.
and I thought about books a little bit more and I thought, wow, here are the many different ways that books fail us. So another set of scenes that I'm going to talk about and record and post in a lot more detail contains those ideas about, well, books are kind of weird, and you pointed to a couple of them, like the refresh cycle on books is crazy. Uh, you know, Apparently the Britannica. There's a lot of people who think that Wikipedia killed Britannica, right? And it turns out that it didn't. Britannica
It
was
was the
already dying. It was
right.
Encarta.
Encarta, exactly. Yes.
Basically, Microsoft bought WorldBook, bundled it
Yes.
for free with the Office
Right.
suite, and
Yes.
you couldn't compete with a free encyclopedia. uh, to charge $1,300 for a book of a bunch of volumes that you were only going to update every couple of years,
Right.
right? And that in contrast with Wikipedia, which updates in real time.
Yep. Yeah.
So I think there's a very juicy thing here, and you in your you have a recent post, "How to Reimagine Your Work in the Age of AI,"
Yeah.
and in it you have a sentence that says, "The book, I believe, needs to be unbundled and then rebundled," which leads to what you did with your map and so forth. So maybe you could like, can you elaborate what you mean by the unbundling and rebundling? What is your what was the motivation, and what do you think is the thing to do?
The idea of unbundling and rebundling is very central to my work, and it's a way of thinking about any system. So I use it to explain how industries evolve. I use it to explain how our jobs are redesigned. They don't just get automated or augmented, they get torn apart and structured. So that's unbundling the job and rebundling it. You can do that to a business, you can do that to a firm, and as it turns out, you can do that to any artifact. So if you look at any book today or any article, it's essentially, I would call it, it's an expression of ideas, but it's not necessarily the optimal expression of ideas. It's a very lossy expression of ideas, if you will, because it carries the weight of a certain narrative, and within that narrative the ideas string together, but there's much more life to those ideas. There are many more ways in which they connect to each other, and all of that gets lost in trying to create a narrative. Now, from that perspective, a narrative plays a very important role when you have to persuade somebody on a big idea. And so, from that perspective, I believe that for persuading an audience on a big idea, a book or an article is still the right medium. The question is, which ideas are big enough, and where do you need persuasion as the right mechanism to kind of get the topic across? So what I've been thinking about is, if you are in the business of ideas, and so far you've been expressing it through linear narratives like audio, video, books, articles, you should, we're at a place where we should actually be thinking about the network nature of ideas. How do different ideas connect with each other? What are unexpected connections between ideas? What are different ways in which seemingly unconnected ideas from different domains can be brought in together? And that is what I mean by unbundling and rebundling, identifying the the unit ideas inside what you are, inside the body of work that you are building, and unbundling it away from the narrative construct within which they are contained today, and figuring out what are new connections without having to again incur the cost of putting a narrative around it. And that's how I've structured all of my reading and all of my ingestion for myself. I'm happy to go into that, but I've been
Mhm.
thinking about how do you make that the end product for people to play around with as well.
Totally love that. And I think we've been kind of on parallel paths,
Mhm.
but motivated by very different events or observations in our lives. But I see that there's this really kind of juicy space in the middle of how do we make ideas more useful?
Right.
Part of it is how do we put ideas to work to improve civilization, maybe. Um, and,
Yeah,
and,
and
and
I think it's at both levels. I think the bigger impact on the world around us kind of plays out through the smaller, relatively selfish need to get better every day and to learn something new every day, and to scratch your curiosity, and your itch for new learning every day. And the way I've seen my work is learn something new every day and figure out a way to put it out so that somebody else can use it as well. And if you do that consistently, good things happen,
yep,
right? You don't have to think about it linearly. Good things happen. You create these ripples around you that attract the right conversations, and so the way, what had sort of constrained it so far had been, while I can learn whatever I want to, and I can organize them in whatever way I want to. Unlike you, I've not been putting the organization of ideas out. I've only been putting the narratives out. And the cost of getting ideas into a narrative is so high, the amount of effort that goes into it is so high that it
yep.
only a small fraction of the ideas would actually come out and hit the market.
That's in fact a major stumbling block I've hit. I just made a post saying, "Hey, I'm going to start in the middle." The title of the post is "In medias res," which is a Latin phrase that means jumping
Mhm.
in the middle. and I'm like, I'm done trying to figure out where the start and the through line is of every narrative, and
I
wait
love that.
until
Yeah.
I've figured it out to get it out, because I will never publish anything, right?
Yeah.
So I love that, and
I love that. Yeah.
I'm remembering that this call is provoked in part by my previous post about, hey, I'm calling all externalizers, like people who do that. I think it's a generous act to put your ideas in the world. I have friends who are like, nobody wants to hear my ideas. Why would
Hmm.
anybody bother? So it would be an egotistical project for me to put my, I'm like, no. Like I would love to know how you think and what you think about the particular issues where we have intersection. And I think that's incredibly fruitful to do. It also, when you put it out at any point, it gives you some place to look back on what you thought at that moment.
Right.
Which bumps right into another problem, which is some people think they have to be consistent on all their ideas for their whole lives, and other people think no, the sign of a mature mind is the ability to evolve and change your opinions on things that matter over time, which is the
Yeah.
side I think both of us fall on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I mean, it's natural for us to explore. And at the same time, there are um, certain certain things we are inherently curious about. So if I look at my work, for instance, it's easy to kind of put it into, well, he's interested in platform strategy or ecosystems or AI or one of these buckets. But the core of what I'm interested in is when sudden change happens because of a huge technological shift or any kind of shift. How does the
Hmm.
fundamental game that's being played change, and what does the new game look like, and hence what do new winners and losers look like? And that's not a time bound, technology bound specific issue. It's an issue that's happened through history. You can track it through the history of warfare, history of statecraft, history of business. You can look at how when the game changes, new winners and losers emerge. So that fundamental idea is what excites me. But in order to go after that, I explore very widely. So I look at history of warfare, as I said. I look at history of medieval technologies. I look at everything that's unrelated to where I want to land up. And so I think what I'm trying to get to is that there are certain things which are inherently interesting to me, but I would love to keep exploring widely around them and look at completely unconnected things and bring that lens and look at that unconnected thing with that lens, because then you're able to find a new connection that nobody else has, because that intersection has just not been explored before. And I think that's what I enjoy in my work too, to find those unexpected connections.
It's hilarious because the video I have queued up that I'm going to post today is kind of a pay-in to James Burke's Connections series on PBS that played way back when, had a companion book, and was one of my big motivators as a kid. I remember watching that, on PBS in the days when you had to watch things and couldn't record them.
Right.
But the whole idea that there are accidents and conjunctures and borrowings from one field to another field, and they lead to all these different revolutions in affairs. I'm an amateur historian of military history,
Hmm.
and love revolutions in military affairs, and was just reading an article this morning about drone warfare and what a revolution it has become, and how it's now combined with AI and a bunch of other things to form something that isn't just remote controlled airplanes with bombs on them. It's very different.
Right.
It's a systemic awareness system.
Yeah.
That was redundant, uh, but it's a system that has sort of distributed awareness and response capacities that didn't exist before. It's
Right.
really it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what I like about um, the unexpected connections between ideas. And I mean, especially if it's, I think increasingly some of the most interesting things that you learn lie at the intersection of things that have previously not been connected. This is also partly, and I'm digressing a bit here, but this is partly why I don't like the academia track too much, because of the citation discipline. It forces you to stick into a lane, right? And
yep.
it kind of it's counter curious. It's not curious. It goes against curiosity, because curiosity would lead you into random directions, because you just want to satisfy your curiosity for the day. You're not here to kind of keep citing things and push the argument forward. And I think when you are curious in that way, that's when you find fundamentally new connections. So that's sort of what I find exciting.
Completely agree. One of my mentors back a long time ago was Russell Ackoff, who's one of the founders of systems thinking. And his peers, he didn't get along that well with his peers, partly because he didn't believe in publishing academic papers with all the proper citations, which is what all his
Right.
peers in systems thinking were doing. He's one of the 6 or 8 people who kind of founded systems theory, systems thinking.
Hmm.
And he would write management books that were incredibly influential. He was very influential, then went away for a while, and has become more influential recently. Peter Senge is kind of a disciple
Yeah.
of Acuff's and a bunch of other people thinking in systems. And
Hmm.
now it's a popular thing. Now we're making it more complicated by thinking in ecosystems, which most people don't understand.
Hmm.
Um, but this whole idea of how do you get thoughts out of your head into a useful form has fascinated me for a while. And in the NeoBooks project, I was one of my complaints about books was that books force serialization of text,
Right.
of words. That you have to publish a book, you must decide which idea comes before which idea, and you have to put them all in one linear order, which is the snapshot you took for that book. And it occurred to me that books are just snapshots of a series of nuggets that actually live in a web that's much more like a wiki or some kind of a web of
Yeah.
relationships and interrelationships. And if we could traverse that web of relationships, that might be a much juicier, more generative, more interesting way to feed our curiosity, to build innovation, to do whatever else. And I think what you're doing in the maps that you're sharing out on your site is very much in that spirit. It's like, hey, here are some of the nodes that showed up that inform this
Yeah.
piece here, and this is how they connect and where they're going. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I think, personally, I've always processed information in that form because one of the things that I've done for the past 16 years now has been whatever I read, um, I take out snippets from what I'm reading. I make my own notes based on that in terms of what it's sparking in me. And I've done that almost every day for the last 16 years. And on some days it's been, doing it from morning to evening. For some days it's been just stepping in for 20 minutes and doing it because I read something that day. So almost everything that I read got, snippets got recorded over the years. And initially I did that in a Word doc. Then I realized that it has
it gets
limitations where
monstrously long, right?
yeah, and it's very difficult to go through it. And so then
Yeah.
I went to Workflowy, which I really liked, largely because it looks like a Word doc, but its bullets can be moved around. And that's what I wanted. I wanted unexpected connections. So if there's a whole sub tree of ideas, I can move it to another part. And I used that for a long time. People talked about Roam and Notion, and I just felt that for me, Workflowy was the simplest way to do it because it had the ability to move things around, but the hierarchy, even though it's unidirectional, it helped organize things for me much better versus keeping
Hmm.
it completely, graphy and mappy. But what I've now done is that with Gen AI coming in, I feel it's the right technology to kind of make sense of ideas in a fundamentally new way. So I've taken all these years of notes that I've collected. I've essentially taken the hierarchies also within that, which is important information because that's how I organized it. And then I essentially, had an LLM look through all those ideas and find new connections between those ideas that had not existed before. And then essentially, on the basis of that, started extracting interesting maps. So it takes some time to do that because there's a big corpus. A lot of it is unconnected, but
Hmm.
the more you do it, I think Gen AI is really good at extracting the concepts. It's good at identifying relationships between concepts, both in terms of obviously frequency, but more importantly in terms of meaning, and how they relate to each other. And then you know you're able to abstract up and down. So that's sort of been the architecture pathing some of the graphs that or the maps that I've been coming out with.
That's really interesting. What I've started to do is feed. So let me actually do a quick screen share.
Hmm.
So I showed you this diagram, which is lying next to
Yep.
me, which is about smartphones and so forth. I scanned this and fed it to Claude, and
Hmm.
Claude can read my handwriting, can interpret this
Yep.
no problem, and then turns it into uh, the diagram.
Yep. Hmm.
This is the V3. This is the third rev of Claude and me talking about these issues. And,
Hmm.
there's a moral panic about, oh my God, youth anxiety is spiking. And then I'm saying it's a misdiagnosis, et cetera. Here's this. And then in my brain, I also have all these kinds of thoughts. So, and actually, I'll avoid going there for right now. I wanted to actually go back to your article and talk about the visualization. But I'm finding that it's a very generative conversation with Claude I'm having,
Yep.
where Claude will completely understand very deeply, more deeply than a normal mortal would, what I'm after, what I'm trying to say. Then Claude will find gaps in the argument and offer in, this and this are also part of what you seem to be saying. Maybe offer a different kind of categorization, but really help me think through how this works. And uh, in this setting, hallucinations don't really matter because
Hmm.
I'm in a conversation and I understand what's being said. And if something
Yep.
that's being said sounds like bullshit, I'll be like, no, that's wrong. But
Yeah.
that's not happening. The
Yeah.
system is understanding me at some deep level. I wanted to go back to your post, How to Reimagine Your Work in the Age of AI, because what we're talking about is your book Reshuffle, but also here's an example of a map of key ideas in Reshuffle that you are building. And what are you using to build these maps? What software?
Yeah, I've used Claude Code. So I've essentially custom created the map extraction from the underlying text, and
Yep,
I gave it the hierarchy of workflow. Yeah, I helped it understand how to think about the hierarchy, and on the basis of that, um, overlay its own connections between ideas on top of that. What I've explicitly told it is to not um, override the hierarchy that I had created myself unless
yep,
there was a clear conflict. And um, so I've been doing that. I've been in this specific case, I essentially gave it the full hierarchy that I of ideas that I had while I was writing the book. So the book is a very specific linear narrative abstraction of that hierarchy or
yep.
expression of that hierarchy. And I keep saying the word using the word hierarchy because
Hmm.
that's how I had organized these ideas in the past. Now with Cloud Code and with thinking of it more in terms of a map, it's able to identify even more connections because I always knew the hierarchy was limited, but it was an easy way for me to manage those ideas in my head and on screen. But now with Cloud Code, I can the way I've organized it, I can have it as a map. I can take a version of the map out here. The actual map has, I think, close to 800 different concepts, and this is
Right.
like 35 or 36 because it's been
Yep.
abstracted at that level. Obviously, it has to be something that you can work with, you can identify, and so I worked at it at different levels of abstraction. Came back to this, but that's really the idea: the ability to extract concepts. I think going back to your point about hallucinations, it's working with a tight text. It's working with
Right.
a corpus that I've built over time, right? So it has to work within that. Secondly, I'm not asking it to generate responses as much as I'm asking it to extract ideas and find connections between them. And thirdly, when I am asking it to find something, I'm asking it to do it relatively more deterministically by looking at this map than by thinking about it as an LLM. So because of all those
Right.
things, and because I've been fine tuning it while building the map, and I don't mean fine tuning in the AI way. I mean just because I've been seeing what it's been building, what connections it's been finding, and I've been giving it feedback on what makes sense, what does not. I tend to trust the map that I'm creating more than just asking the LLM directly. So
Hmm.
that in a way it's uh, sort of revitalized my work because it has helped me bring out things that I wrote or copy pasted 12 years back, and they've just been in workflow and I've never gone back to them. And it
Yeah.
suddenly found a connection with what I'm doing right now. So it's been very interesting in those terms, in terms of just figuring out new things from work that I'd looked at in the past.
I love that. I also, just to scroll down this page,
Yep.
I also love that what you're doing is you're really this page is really meaty. It has a whole bunch of different things that you're trying to do
Mhm.
in the work. But also, if we go over to your reshuffle map, here's the live map. So you're
Right.
saying this is basically code created by Claude
Yes.
as a map. Perfect.
Yeah, I had to
Um,
go back and forth on making the UX interesting, but yes, it's
I totally understand.
yeah,
And so here's text around it. Read the explainer on this particular thing, connects to these different thoughts,
yeah.
which is where for hopefully connecting here. This is a lovely way to explore a series of topics. I think this is great.
Yeah, especially for somebody who's read the book, doesn't want to go through the narrative again. Asking them to go back to the book is not the most effective way of doing things. People, anyway, put in post-its, dog-ear it, do all kinds of things. So um, this sort of simulates or solves for some of those issues for people who want to come back. And if you go to explore pathways on top, that
Explore map or start pathways.
pathways, start pathways, yeah, that goes to, so if you go down here, it goes to those four. So it basically looks at the four pathways that are there in the book, but the book is
Hmm.
not written in four sections. These four
Hmm.
are talked about simultaneously across the book. So it's difficult for somebody to explore this pathway while reading the book, because they have to kind of weed through the narrative that's weaving across all four. But here it's been extracted as four different pathways in a way.
There's an Argentine author named Julio Cortázar who wrote a book called Rayuela, which means hopscotch,
Hmm.
apparently in 1963. And in the front of this book, it says, you can read this book in kind of any order. Here's a suggested list of reading of
Huh.
the chapters, but you can jump
Right.
around any way you want. It's a non-linear narrative.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So,
Very interesting.
um, and here are my notes from this
Huh.
call for, and here's the thought that I mentioned earlier, how books fail us.
No, I
Uh,
love that. I'd love to hear, your story of the brain. What's kept you going? How did it start? What's been the unintended benefits of doing this?
I'm happy to do that. When I started using the brain, I was the first stop on the brain's first launch press tour. I was the
Okay.
first analyst they saw, and many years later, in fact, only a few years ago, the inventor Harlan Hugh said to me, Jerry, I wish I had known ahead of time that the rest of the tour wasn't going to go like our first meeting, because I immediately, the moment Harlan opened his laptop and started demoing the software, which looked remarkably like this, it didn't have curvy lines, it had straight lines.
Hmm.
I don't think it had fave icons yet. All these little icons mean that there's a link associated with each of these thoughts. But it was very similar to this. And the moment he opens his laptop, my wet brain is like, oh, I get this. This is how I think. We proceeded
Right.
to have a fabulous meeting. I wrote about them in the newsletter. Very weirdly, I was already halfway done writing an issue of Esther's newsletter Release 1.0 about bookmark management and mind mapping. And everything I had seen did not make me happy at the time.
Right.
I was just wondering, like, God, is this just not going anywhere? And then these guys show up and show me this. And at the time, I was a tech industry analyst. Uh, so I would get a call from a journalist saying, hey, I'm writing about instant messaging or buddy lists. What do you know? And while
Mm.
I was on the phone, I wouldn't tell them I was doing this, and I didn't have video conferencing and screen sharing at the time because this is back in the 90s. I would look up 90s and zeros. I would look up what I had, and here are all the buddy lists I've ever heard of, most of which I've forgotten, most of which are dead, long gone. But if you go back to the Internet Archive, you can find them. So I don't get rid of dead companies um, because as Nassim Taleb tells us in The Black Swan, we never hear from the graveyard.
Hmm. Hmm.
So for
I love.
me,
Yeah.
it's very important to keep the old stuff. I don't purge dead companies or dead links. I think that dead links are important. I think permalinks are important, and I'm very frustrated with publications that don't give me permalinks or that change the titles of articles all the time. This is happening
Right.
more and more. Like the New York Times will have an article when it posts, and then I mean a title on an article when it posts, and then 6 hours later they'll retitle it entirely. And
Yeah.
I just like, you just did violence to my memory. I don't like that. Um, so at the time, I was a tech analyst, and first, this started as a really nice way of tracking all the people that were doing things in the world I cared about. So here's AOL Instant Messenger, which was part of AOL. AOL was bought by Verizon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
Companies that looked invulnerable then went kaput. Here's a compendium of Kodak, Woolworth, Enron, Britannica. This is what you can do in the brain. And I only started realizing this later. So this thought I created in 2015. You can see each thought has a date created, date last modified, right? So in
Right.
2015, I was like, you know what? I put Kodak, I'm sure I put Kodak in my brain earlier. So 1997, December of 97, I added Kodak. This is one of the first thoughts I put in my brain.
Mm.
Later, I'm like, there's a trend here. So I put that under resistance to change. And then I put that opposite successfully transformed companies. And then sometimes, oops. But IBM basically jumped on open source and saved itself. Microsoft is not the company Microsoft was when I was a tech analyst. Nokia
Right.
has reinvented itself 4 times in its history. The last one not so successfully because it's not a big player right now. Um, and so this not only contains also it contains things that aren't business oriented because I think everything is deeply intertwined.
Hmm.
Here's Brad Pitt, who is an actor. I have a lot of actors in my brain. Here are most, but not all of his movies. This is a scroll bar, so there are more
Right.
movies up here. He was in Interview with the Vampire, which was from the 1976 book, which is part of the Vampire Chronicles that Anne Rice wrote. In the Southern Gothic style, she is a novelist. So were all these people. Here's the scroll bar.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're not out of the A's yet on this screen full of
Yeah.
authors. I have
Right.
not read all the books by all these authors. They just exist. So here's Alphonse Daudet. I don't remember putting him in my book, but he wrote a book, Letters from My Windmill, Lettres de mon moulin. I have no idea why I put that in my brain, but I did in
Mm.
2014. But what
Huh.
happens is this is where it's different from workflowy or
Yeah.
Rome or everything else. Because I'm always wandering through the whole landscape and curating and adding things and moving things around, I'm always editing and curating as I navigate or as I demo. Um, First, it refreshes those pathways in my wetware. My wet
Hmm.
brain I have better unaided recall because I do that. But also, I then see things that I was like, oh, that was a good idea back when. And uh, at some point long ago, I was trying to figure out more about Brian Arthur and his work, his research on virtuous circles. And I looked up and it was I had it under feedback. Yeah, I had it under feedback. And I also had vicious cycles under feedback. And that got me to realize and then show in my brain that what is a virtuous circle to one player
Right.
in
Is a
in
vicious
a
cycle to another.
competitive environment is a
Mhm.
vicious cycle for the others.
Yeah.
In this
Yeah.
case, when Microsoft Office wins the Office race, Novell and Lotus just get sucked down the drain.
Hmm.
Their markets just completely dry up because everybody says, "Oh, we're going to use that instead." So that's
So
an
so
example of the
what's
kind of insights
motivated
I
you
get
to
from this.
what's motivated you to keep doing it, and what's been like the unintended consequences or benefits of this?
Um, what motivates me is that this lets me find stuff that I normally couldn't find again.
Hmm.
Every day there are articles I read. One of my big frustrations is that people are writing great stuff or recording great videos or whatever, and mostly they're lost in the bit bucket.
Right.
I have a system here where, and one of the big questions of all these organizing systems, whether it's build a second brain or getting things done, or name your framework, and all these frameworks I have in my brain, right? So here's the Getting Things Done framework. Here's David Allen who wrote the book. It's all I put it all in here. Um, but one of the great benefits is being able to actually locate things again. And then
Hmm.
it's a sense making tool. So it's not just a database and compendium of stuff like Brad Pitt and the movies he was in, but rather I can create opinions and represent my opinions. So I use three colors in my brain. White is the default color for thoughts. Yellow just means, hey, there's a collection here. And then purple is opinions. So recently I was on a call, some friends and I started a call about Pope Leo's new encyclical. And
Mm.
the first question we were asked is like, hey, what's your relationship to religion that you bring to reading the encyclical? And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So I went in and I found a couple thoughts that I already had put in my brain before, because I consider myself an engaged Zen Quaker. I happen to love the Quakers. But then I created a bunch of new thoughts.
Mm.
I also have a thought I won't show for very long. It's thorny questions for Christianity. That's for a different time. If I get really brave later on, I will create a video about that. But that's kind of how it works and how I use it. And
Got
I'll
it.
slow down
Yeah.
now because I don't want to monopolize our whole call on this. But that's
No, I.
it's been it's been deeply influential in how I think, and it's given me a couple big ideas like, hey, we're mostly amnesic as a civilization.
Mhm. Yeah. No, that's true. I don't think we have the discipline to do something like this. It requires a lot of curiosity, but also a lot of discipline to keep doing that. A lot of people are curious, but they keep jumping to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, which
Yep,
is fine. It just doesn't help you come back and curate a corpus of your ideas. I think before Gen AI, it was just difficult to clean these things up. Now it's a
right.
lot easier to clean these things up. A lot of the operational hassle goes away, and the difference that I've seen between just using, say, an LLM versus using a coding, Claude code kind of um, an interface is that you can play around and create the tool that works for you, and
Hmm.
and you can keep coming back to it and keep improving it. So you can figure out which kind of extraction and which kind of mapping and which kind of relationships and all of that, what works for you, right? And I think that's where it becomes really powerful. It's the whole idea of vibe coding as a way of creating software for a market of one. It sounds interesting, but it becomes really tangible in cases like this, because nobody would create a software that organizes my ideas for me and doesn't work for anybody else. But with vibe coding, you have the power to do that. So that's been a revelation for me.
Yeah, totally agree. Uh, there's a thought in my brain that basically says different people have different mental representational styles,
Hmm.
which means there can't be one tool for thought that wins the game and works for everybody.
Yeah.
For me, the brain has the friendliest, most mind-friendly layout of any of the tools I've seen, and I've seen a lot of them because I study the space. But I've got several friends who say, like, Jerry, for me, when you show me the brain, it looks like spaghetti.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
overwhelming, and I can't follow. For other people, when I give a tour of my brain, they're like, oh my God, I totally got that. But when they're in
Yeah.
there by themselves, they can't find their way around.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting questions that I thought was important before LLMs hit big was, how do we help people find their way to the thinking tool that's going to represent them and help them remember and show what they think? Now I've got a draft post that basically says, hey, does generative AI obsolete tools for thinking?
Right.
And as you might imagine, I'm on the no side of the
Mhm.
answer for that question. I think that actually the representations become more interesting and more useful because they are the artifacts through which we can have a better conversation with each
Yeah.
other and with the LLMs.
Yeah, I think so. I think they are the artifacts through which we can, or they are the mechanisms through which we can organize our ideas better, make them more accessible in fundamentally new ways for people. I mean, I
Yep.
would never have done this map creation for my previous book just because it's I mean, it didn't take me long to do it vibe coding, but if I had taken this to an agency and asked them to build a website, they would have, had their own spin on it just because I wouldn't have known
And
any better,
and, and it
right?
would have been $150,000 bill.
Yeah, it would have been all those things without the fun of iteration as well, because every time I would want to iterate, they would say, okay, the bill goes up a little more, so the fun of iteration goes away as well. So I think all of those
Totally.
things, all of those things change now. I think there's a lot of advantage there. I think it's a bit like, I don't know if it's a very good comparison, but when the bicycle was invented, people might have said that, well, this is it's going to take away your exercise because you won't have to walk that far anymore. You can just cycle. But then with that, you could do fundamentally new things, and you could increase the radius of what you. And I'm not trying to be simplify or minimize the by comparing the bicycle with Gen AI. Gen AI is much more, um, I would say, um, it's much more interesting.
Yeah.
Also
Yeah.
because the output is not always known. It's almost like it's this intern who you have to keep spanking to get back into order because it's this over
Yeah.
enthusiastic intern who gets really good stuff out, and then once in an all too often while it comes out with things that don't make any sense. So you have to give it that feedback, and then it gets better. So I sort of like that iteration. I think, for me, that in the process of doing this, hallucination has been a feature, not a bug. I've actually liked telling it, here's how I like it, here's what I don't like, and
Yeah.
I don't want this, I want this, and giving that feedback. I've actually enjoyed that.
That's fascinating. And we're just sort of, I'm surprised at some of the conclusions people are deriving because this thing just blew up in December of 22,
Hmm.
and it has eaten our lives since then, and it's eating budgets and it's holding the economy up, and there's a bunch of strange effects it's
Right.
having. But we have not had time to sort of metabolize as a society what
Yeah.
it means and how it's going to change work and our sense of identity and a bunch of other things. But a whole lot of people are already drawing those conclusions. Um, and I'm sort of suspicious of studies that make conclusions right now because we haven't had time
Yeah.
to like make adapt to the shift and make it actually real.
No, I think it's especially with Gen AI, right? It's so 2 points over here. One is that I don't think we've ever had a technology that is seemingly horizontally applicable and yet is vertically inconsistent. So
Yeah,
electricity is horizontally applicable, but it's vertically consistent. Every time you plug into the electric system, you know what to expect. With Gen
yeah.
AI, it seems that it can do everything, and yet it's completely inconsistent in how it does specific things.
It's the jagged frontier.
Exactly. It's the jagged frontier, right?
Yeah,
And I think that is because of that, it's very easy to come up with all kinds of studies to prove anything you want, given that jagged frontier. You can always find a certain sample within which something works, and that same thing doesn't work in another sample, and so on. But at the same time, it's there's an evolution both in terms of how good the tools are, but also how well people are reimagining what to do with it. I mean, 4 months back, I would have thought of, AI as the way to generate narratives much more quickly. And I think that's the commodity way of thinking about it. But
yeah.
using AI as a way of finding new ways to represent those ideas and traverse those ideas is probably the reimagine what can be done because the constraints have been taken off. So that's where my head is. I want to keep looking for reimagining things that could not formats that could not have existed in the past but now become possible, rather than doing what already existed much faster. I don't think that makes sense.
I love that. This means I agree. This means I
Yeah,
disagree.
I get that. Yeah.
Um, what you just said really triggers and sort of resonates well for me because I keep thinking of sort of there are layers of meaning somehow, and then
Hmm.
there's different things we do with that meaning, one of which is storytelling. And it turns out that storytelling is insanely important. That stories, logical arguments are not how we convince other people of things. Stories
Sure.
are. There's
Yep.
a thought in my brain, membership and emotion trump reason most of the time. And it's because you could give me a crystal clear argument about something that's irrefutable with data that I like, wow, that's perfect. But if agreeing with you meant that I was going to be ostracized from my community, I would happily gaslight you and say, nope, there's no way that's possible. And we see that happening every day, all the time.
Right.
People are trying to convince people with facts, but the facts don't work. So the storytelling tools matter a lot, and we have crappy storytelling tools. The one we have that's ubiquitous is called PowerPoint or Keynote.
Mhm.
It's basically a storyboard activator. except we don't use it like a storyboard because storyboards were used to create movies, right? Or maybe books or whatever. But really, I think of Steven Spielberg writing storyboards for
Yeah.
E.T. and all that early on.
Yeah.
And PowerPoint is more like it's a trip through the logic of something, and we use it in lots of different ways. I was a very intense Prezi user for a while. I
Right.
abandoned Keynote for Prezi, and then Prezi lobotomized itself. They had a second big makeover, and they basically lost the endless zoomable whiteboard, and I couldn't find my way back to it, and I was very sad. So I use the brain a lot, but the brain scares people. Some people think it looks
Yep.
like a bowl of spaghetti, so that's not good. So one of the things I'd love to find is what is the next best storytelling tool?
Yeah.
Does it look like Annie Leonard's story of stuff? If you remember, she was drawn into the background and
Yep.
she did a very nice job of animating a story around what happens to our stuff. Problem is that that cost $150,000 from a design studio.
Right. Right. And I'm wondering whether, given all that you've done with setting up the brain, um, you want to you want to take the path of vibe coding to tinker around and figure out if there's something that can be built on top of it which helps you tell
For
better
sure.
stories. And I'm sure
Yes.
there are, right, like the map that you just showed over here of the ideas that are there in my book, right? I have a different interface at my end which I play with, where I'm able to touch a node and I'm able to make it do different kinds of things. I'm able to essentially say, okay, here's a node and here's a node, they don't connect right now. If you were to connect them, what would be the story? And it comes up with a lot of irrelevant stuff, but it comes up with some very interesting things from time to time, and then I make that node connection happen. So
It's like you're doing a little mashup exercise inside this
exactly.
mind map.
Right. And the results of the mashup are surprising because you're connecting things that should not be connected, and the results are very surprising. So in those segments, when things like that happen, um, I feel that you're kind of getting into things that your human brain was not able to get into, um, just because of bandwidth issues, right? But
Yeah.
because with Gen AI, there's a lot of these coloring between the lines, even if some of those don't make sense, but many of them do. That unlocks a lot of possibilities. And that then it fires your brain in a new direction because it sparks your curiosity about, well, I didn't know that these two ideas could connect, and certainly didn't know that they could connect in this way, and certainly didn't know that they have been connected in the past in completely different literature that I was not aware of. And so those are
Mm.
the kinds of things that it can once it connects them, it can then go and find out uh, interesting topics like that. So that's been super interesting for me.
There are a couple of innovation methodologies that try to systematically cross wires and contrast
Hmm.
things
Right.
to drive your brain to new places. And I think you're describing something like that, only much more fun and more lively and interactive. Um, you also touched something that I've thought about a lot, which is how do we overlay or compare our narratives? I have a video I put out called "My Story or My History of Trust."
Hmm.
And in it, I say, a long time ago, we used to know how to live in community on the commons. We broke that, and then we started doing all these other weird things. And I go through a whole narrative, which I'm sure is very triggering to a lot of people, but I don't get to hear from them. And what I would really love is for people to go, right here, you said something that I completely agree with and hadn't thought of, but then you connected to something I completely disagree with and I don't understand. Here's my version of what I think happened there. How did you get to where you are? And I would love to see that. I remember at one point I was in the lobby of some event talking with a friend, and I was talking about how the Mongols basically were invading China. So China built the wall, the many different wall, the Great Wall of China. And so
Hmm.
the Mongols kind of bounced off the wall and went west to Europe. And they were fine as long as they had pasture land. And when they hit mountains, they had trouble because their method of warfare could live off the land as long as they had nice pastures, blah, blah, blah. And then my friend, the person I'm talking to, says, "Oh, yes. And also," and I'm forgetting exactly what he said. And I wish I'd sat down and recorded it because he then offered this really wonderful overlay that didn't contradict my story, but
Right.
absolutely amplified it in brilliant, brilliant ways. That conversation at scale, which is a whole different question, is really
Yeah.
juicy and interesting to me. The problem is we think scale means industrial scale, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, no, I think so. That's another point that's interesting because one of the things that I like about the fact that LLMs are at the end of the day a technology dealing with language. So forget about all the distraction and distracting narratives about whether they have consciousness or not. All that is irrelevant.
Yeah,
And language has story within it. Language has meaning within it, and that's what they're extracting. But fundamentally, they're technology that deals with language, and I think that's what makes it interesting because we've never had technologies that deal with language at scale. We've had technologies that deal with statistics at scale. And yes, you can argue that underneath it, it's a
mm,
prediction engine and all of that. But the point is that it deals with language, and because it extracts the meaning, uh, it infers the meaning in the language that it's dealing with. It is able to deal with meaning at scale, and that I find is, for anybody who's working in ideas, that's incredibly powerful. So I'm less excited about generative AI's generative capabilities. I'm more excited about its organizational capabilities, the ability to organize ideas, make sense of them. I don't think that's generative in itself. It's more the ability to find the underlying patterns, find the atomic unit of any thought. And I mean, with the tool that I have at the back end that I've coded for myself, I can keep asking it to go down further and further into the underlying thought so that it gets to the atomic unit. And that's very interesting because then it can visualize it and show here are the different layers on which this idea is built. So
yeah.
there's some very interesting things you can end up doing with it because it deals with language.
I love that. And this whole focus on language is super interesting. I read a really clever post a while ago that said, hey, we train these things on language. So they're
Right.
very good at language. They don't necessarily understand the underlying physics and the other kinds of things going on, but they've inferred a whole big bunch of something. And they've
Yeah.
got some kind of internal representation, which is what happens when you train these things. There's some kind of n-dimensional tokenized map inside that we have no access to. But it's interesting. I also bump into people who are like, oh, it's just a stochastic parrot. It can only they're useless because these tools can only parrot back what they heard before. And I
Mhm.
think, well, no,
I don't
that's
think
not
that's
actually
true.
tr
Yeah,
that's not true whatsoever.
exactly.
And the experience I compare it to actually is AlphaGo. Do you remember when
Right.
AlphaGo
Yeah.
beat Lee Sedol at the game of
Yeah.
Go?
Yeah.
And then afterward, so AlphaGo was trained on historic Go games. Then
Yeah.
they took that away and they created AlphaZero,
Correct.
which
Yeah.
was only given the rules of Go and told to play itself. And there's a
Yeah.
beautiful chart that basically grows like this to the point where it trains itself up to pass Lee Sedol, then it passes AlphaGo, then it goes into this stratospheric sort of
Hmm.
area. And that part of the curve I think of as creativity.
Hmm.
And what I think it was doing then was discovering moves that no human has made before because humans thought, oh, that's a stupid move.
Right.
But we weren't really thinking about just the board.
Yeah.
And that's a very simple extrapolation in a game that's a 19 by 19 board, which has black and white stones. So it's incredibly, simple to read. But if you pull that into language and the richness of our ideas and metaphors and history, and that we've like shoveled all this into its gaping yaw, and can now play with it, I think the same thing is happening. And
Yeah.
I'm really interested, and I've been having super fruitful conversations, in particular with Claude, in territory like that, where I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm exploring this and this and this. What do you think? And then we're off to the races. And before I know it, a couple hours are gone and a bunch of new ideas showed up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think um, I think that analogy of AlphaGo is interesting because we are sort of limited by the boundaries of the game board, and you know, it's probably thinking about it in ways that do not necessarily respect the boundaries and the rules in themselves, and is looking at it in fundamentally new ways, right? And I think, at least with the map that I've been building for myself, that's been my experience because there's a certain cognitive drag in going through your ideas on a regular basis, because if you're a curious person, you want to keep going to the next one and the next one and learn new things. Yes, you
Yeah.
record all of that, there's the discipline in that, but there was, for every, I would say, 100 instances I would read new things, I would go back and revisit something from the past one or two times, right? Or maybe, let's say it's one in 10, but it was a fraction. Now, the going back and revisiting is actually more interesting because I don't have to put the cognitive effort. I just ask it to read the connections in a new way and find me
Right.
something interesting. And as I said, some of those connections don't make sense, but a lot of them do, and it's that revitalizes. It makes the effort of having built the corpus worth it because you're able to bring new life into it.
It's very interesting because a lot of people who are into note taking or tools for thought a lot of them, us, have come down to Markdown as the lingua franca, as a good, simple, common format.
Right.
Where we might have been using, Microsoft Word or Google Docs or whatever for some of this, we're now like, let's just do Markdown, and that means they're using Obsidian or one of the other tools. I've got Obsidian open on my desktop all the time. I use it
Yeah.
intensely. Um, but then they create a corpus, and in some cases, there's a woman who posted, I just deleted my second brain, and she was getting nothing out of it. She
Mhm.
had put a tremendous amount of work in, had followed all the rules, had tagged things up, and so forth. And it's just there was no payoff for her.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because just taking notes and dropping them into a space isn't somehow enough. We then need to find the connections, make the connections, see the connections. I'm running out of words, but I think you and I both are thinking that we need to do more with that so
Mhm.
that it highlights and so that it informs the LLMs to be able to help us highlight, connect, and innovate and create.
Yeah, I think, I think there are two aspects to it. One is that you should be a person who cares about connections, not a person who cares about note taking. So I think that is a fundamental difference. It's very easy to keep taking notes and keep storing all of it and never having invested any money, any time in finding those connections. Gen AI can help you find the connections, but if you're not somebody who inherently enjoys finding connections, you won't prompt it in the right way, right? You have to be
Yeah.
motivated enough to make it do that. And so, in my experience, what you can do with your second brain with Gen AI is limited by what you think you can do with it. Because just throwing all your notes into it and not having the imagination of how to direct it to do something next. So there's what I'm trying to say is that one part of it is yes, the actual operational curatorial effort to make those connections. But even if you don't do a really good job of that, even if you can keep going back and forth with the LLM to keep finding new connections, that in itself can help improve that curatorial ability over time. But fundamentally, what distinguishes you then is the motivation to keep finding those connections. You should get a high out of finding new connections. That's when it'll become really valuable for you. So I think that's the key difference.
And as you're saying that, I'm realizing that I can't understand incurious people. I know they exist and I empathize with them a lot, but I'm so curious, and it sounds like you're so curious that the act or the state of not being curious feels very foreign and alien to me.
Yeah, I think I personally have fallen into the trap of losing curiosity from time to time because I believe I should be doing something. The cost of curiosity is that you can't simply benefit from repetition. There are benefits to
Right,
repetition, right? And a lot of people in the course of their work actually benefit from repetition. They figure out how to do one thing really well and keep doing it again and again, right?
right.
And for such people, if you build your work around doing that, then there is no incentive to be curious because it's taking you away from repeating more and harvesting more. I have this. I mean, I say this quite often to companies I work with that the traditional view of consulting, if I'm coming in to answer a problem for you, you might call it consulting, but the traditional model of consulting is actually counter curious. It is find a solution once and keep selling that solution to multiple people. Whereas the
Right.
model that I want to bring in is give me a new problem every time I come in so that I learn something new, I can abstract from it, and I can apply that in fundamentally new situations. So you can to the customer, you might be solving the same problem, which is come in and solve my problem or answer my question. But there's a curious way to do it, and there's a counter curious way to do it. And depending on where you fall, your choices will completely change. Because in a counter curious way, once you solve the question once, you're going to start looking for 20 other places where you can apply the same solution. In a curious model, if you solve a new question for the first time, you'll come back, reflect on it, try to understand what were the underlying ideas with which it connected, what was fundamentally something new that you learned. Personally, for me, because I had this workflow, every time I learned something new, I could always bring it back and connect it over there. And that improved the underlying lens that I had. So
Yeah.
that ability to have this, and I'm sure it's the same with you as I saw you walk through the brain, that ability to know that here's what I already know and here's something new that I know and now I know where that fits in and where it connects and here's a very interesting new connection. I think the returns to that are not very obvious, but they compound over time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, it's interesting that I think Gen AI is going to help us. It's going to help us foster more curiosity because it's going to eliminate the repetitious stuff,
Hmm.
right? So if your job was, and this is going to be troublesome to the people who found satisfaction in mastering, let's say, the process of M&A, and then they know every step of the process, and they're just going to go through that over and over again. And for them, the creativity was, is this a good deal? How do I find another deal? And so on and so forth. And the repetition was in the professional capacity to do something at a very high level. Got that. But boy, so many of these things are now just automatable. I like following Ethan Mollick at Penn. I think he's very, very, very good at walking the leading edge and then
Hmm.
sharing out what he's learning and what he's doing. And
Right.
early on in his book Co-Intelligence, he says, the project I used to give my students in entrepreneurship and innovation that would take all quarter to do, I now give them every week,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because they can ask, and I want to encourage them to ask Gen AI to answer, to write a business plan, to write a marketing plan, to do whatever
Yeah.
else,
Yeah.
except they need to now understand the results.
Yeah.
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 And there's a whole series of conversations to be had about how this
Yeah.
influences
Absolutely.
education,
Mhm.
hiring, a bunch of things. It's a really, we're at a very strange moment that's both worrisome and exciting. Um,
I think it's certainly exciting for the curious. I really feel that if you are curious and if you have the ability to keep asking new questions and then applying that knowledge um, towards interesting solutions, the underlying infrastructure for that exists, and that's remarkable because it was never there. It was all the hard work of doing that was up to you. So
yeah.
there's a lot of advantage over there.
When the spreadsheet first comes out and people can start doing what if
Yeah,
analysis, that was a game changer because
yeah,
before that you
yeah,
had to add up the sums and you had to re-add the sums by hand, and boy, that was going to take forever. So you didn't
yeah,
do it. And all of a sudden we have what if with the world, with language, with the full richness of language, and that's really transformative. And I love how what you were saying earlier calls that out so nicely.
yeah,
Um, it's cool.
yeah,
I could go on talking for a really long time, but I want to honor your time. And I'm just
yeah.
wondering, do you have anything you'd like to end the call with? Any thoughts or questions that are still in your head or whatever?
Yeah, I think I mean, to everyone listening, then I would just reiterate this again that the opportunity with the tools now, if you're interested in ideas, if you're interested in new ways to express ideas, the opportunity with the tools now is sort of limited by what you think you can do with it. It's no longer by what you can do with it. I've at least personally experienced that. There have been times when I've thought that this is the limit of what can be achieved with this.
Yeah,
And you do learn because of the jagged frontier, you do learn that it's not good at certain things, but very many times you're surprised by things that it ends up spewing. So while I'm not a big fan of saying, using AI is the solution. I don't believe it is, but using AI is the only path forward to the solution because the more you use it, the more you realize what you're capable of doing with it. And so I think from that perspective, going back to the original question with which we started this, for externalizers, I think Gen AI, absolute thumbs up, big positive, huge opportunity, new ways to express, your ideas and bring them out in fundamentally new forms. So I think that it's incredible.
yeah, me too. weirdly optimistic amid the doom, because this is also so scary for so many people, and
Mhm.
and we don't know how it plays out, and there's so many issues at hand.
Yeah.
Um, thank you
No, I'm
for
not
helping.
downplaying. I'm not downplaying those things at all.
Yeah,
If you have curiosity and agency, there are things you can do with it. Even with that, it might not be sufficient. But if you don't have those two things, your task is more cut out for sure.
yeah, exactly. And I think one of the virtues of being adaptable is that I think that will help make it
Yeah.
through the next stretch where things are going to change a lot more than they have changed so far.
Hmm.
Um, Thank you.
Thank you,
That was
Joey.
really a fun journey, and leaves me with a lot
Likewise.
of open questions. I made a lot of notes. I sent you in the chat. I sent you a link to the article about the woman who
Yes.
deleted her second brain.
Yeah.
Um, but to be
I'm going to
continued.
get into that. No, this has been
Cool.
great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Cool. I can
Great.
clip the end. Any afterthoughts?
No, this was great. I mean, also loved hearing about what got you into it, but I think yeah, I'd love to kind of keep this going. As I put more stuff out, please let me know your feedback because I have more things coming out and new ways to kind of traverse the ideas and play with them. So I think that's going to be important. And I also think it's going to create the right connective tissue between books because books are so episodic. There's this big launch and there's years of work towards it. And it's just so much more just massaging these maps and keep, something you can improve on a daily basis and it shows up to people on a daily basis. So that excites me. I mean,
Yep.
so yeah, absolutely would love to keep the conversation going. If you have an opportunity to read the book or now even have a look at the map, let me know your thoughts and
I was
yeah,
playing with the map some. I really liked what I was bumping into.
yeah,
The first comment I had was really only based on my experience with the brain, which was that and this is another post I just posted to my Substack, which is where is up is the title of the post. And what I'm saying in the post is one of the things I love about using the brain is that it always has a sense of orientation. I always know where up is and what up means,
hmm,
just because of this up, down, left
got it.
trope that they create visually. And
Hmm,
that most of the tools, when you're in a force field or rubber band diagram, you never know what's up or why things are,
got it.
here or there. When you're in three dimensions, it's worse. Three dimensions don't help
Yeah, yeah,
unless you're trying to navigate three-dimensional data, in which case
yeah.
3D is great, but otherwise 3D is a mess.
Hmm.
So I was going to suggest playing with Claude and saying,
Yeah,
"Hey, can you emulate the brains display and
yeah.
see if that helps you do it?" And then the second question I had was, are you asking Claude to create a data layer that stays consistent from visit to visit, that gets
Yeah.
enriched,
Yeah.
that where the map you're seeing is just a visual interpretation of the persistent data layer? Because otherwise the LLM will change the underlying data from visit to visit, right? I don't know what you're doing to create a
No, in this case,
persistent.
it can't be changed. It's actually loaded on the map.
Okay,
So
good.
I can update it, but it's loaded.
Yeah, but I think a really rich area is to create kind of a rich data layer. It's a little bit like Nora Bateson's warm data hypothesis, but maybe a little different because I'm very interested in sharing a layer of interactive data with other people so that when I update the node
Hmm.
about build a second brain with my tool, you can see what I updated from your tool insofar as your tool lets you see it.
Got it.
But that will only happen if we're sort of updating a
Interoperating. Yeah.
common layer of
Yeah.
data. And
Yeah.
that's where I want to head.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
No, that's super interesting. But I'm going to work on the way this up question. I think, rather than ask it to emulate the brain, I'm going to say this is what the brain does. Give me five other ways of doing it, and it might come up with a fun new way of doing it. So that should be
perfect.
interesting. I'll have a look
Perfect.
at it. I think that's
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
missing for somebody who hasn't been there before, because right now the map works for somebody who's read the book, but not for somebody who's coming in for the first time. To solve for that, I've tried to do those, default
I think
traversal.
the paths are very
Yeah.
good.
Okay. So that's what
Yeah.
I've done for now. But yeah, I think this makes sense.
If anything, you might want to do a couple of podcasts yourself or
Hmm.
just videos yourself that start from the paths.
Hmm. Yeah.
So in chapter 3 of the book, I say, blah, blah, blah. Here's what
Yeah.
that looks like.
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
journey through a series of nodes or assertions that
Yeah.
are in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
book, and then
Absolutely.
let people sort of grow into the bigger map from the specific path. I think that
Right.
because the paths are narrative
Yeah.
streams, narrative flows, and that people get narrative. It like
Mm.
it
Yeah.
sinks in really easily.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Great.
Cool.
Thanks. Thanks, Jerry. It's been a pleasure.